All right, welcome to another session of Becky Live. Today's topic is around tension. So I am CEO of Vertical Leadership Consulting and just do these once a month for us to take a look and explore some interesting topics for leadership development in these modern and complex times. So I'm happy to be here exploring tension with you today, where we're going to explore the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what are we going to cover today? We are going to talk about the different types of tension that we're embedded in and face every day. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about how we get derailed. And then I'm going to give a few tips on how to navigate. All right. And one of the things I do kind of want to neutralize tension a little bit. Oftentimes it gets a negative connotation, but a lot of beautiful things emerge from tension. I just went to a wine tasting dinner last night, and one of the things that they were talking about is there was an area in California that they said vine grapes wouldn't grow. Someone was provocative enough to say, well, I'm going to try it. And so they tried it, and there was tension in that the vines had to work much harder to grow in that environment. But what ended up happening is there's kind of talk now that this is a new emergent type of Cabernet, that it has revitalized and brought some new things. So I think that's really important to know that tension can bring about some really good things. And in my experience, tension, a lot of coaching clients get referred to me or come to me because they're sitting in tension and they're having a hard time resolving it. And if you sit in that tension with them, a lot of beautiful things can emerge. So what happens? Well, there's typically some sort of tension, and we are sometimes aware of it and sometimes not. We have reactions, which typically are unconscious to us because, again, we haven't recognized we're in tension. And even our reactions, our brain, if it had to analyze every single thing that happened to us every day, we would be so exhausted by 7 a.m. if you wake up at 6 a.m. So our brain has some automatic things that happen that help us process through the world and be able to actually live and enjoy it. And so a lot of our reactions are unconscious. But they can be good and bad, all right? And how we react really determines how we frame things, the stories that we tell, what's visible to us, what's not visible to us, and then it has an impact, not only for us individually, but all of the elements that are in that tension, whether it's our family, our partner, our kids, our coworkers, our team, our company, even socially, it has kind of these ripple effects and these impacts, some that can be seen, some that remain hidden. So I really do think that if we can start to reframe and use tension in new ways, that there's going to be some really lovely things that can happen. And so one of the things for reframing tension, I'm going to tell you kind of a myth to explore kind of the good, bad, ugly of tension. And so I'm going to read this so that I remember it correctly. So it goes, "A fight is going on inside of me," the grandfather said to the boy. "It is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferior, lies, faults, pride, superiority, and ego." He continued, "The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. And the same fight is going on inside of you and inside every other person." And so the grandfather thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, "Which wolf will win?" And the old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." And I really love this myth. In fact, there's even some meta discussions going on in some of the think tanks that I'm a part of, that what is really one of the key things that's kind of our society is breaking apart is we don't have myths that hold us together in a collective space. And this is kind of one of those myths about There is good and evil inside of each of us. And inside of each tension, there is kind of this good and evil. And there is some danger in kind of having it viewed as separate and distinct, but you can't really separate it. Like it all is in there. All right. And so I love this myth as a reminder. It depends on what we focus on, what we feed, how we frame things. So I do also want to start with just a little bit of clarity around the word tension, because there is a difference between tension, pressure, and conflict. All right. And so I always like to go to the origins of the word. And all of these actually have origins in Latin. So tension, if you go to the origin, means to stretch. Pressure is about pressing, and conflict is about fighting. All right. And so I want you to think back to the myth and the story that I just told you about the two wolves. There is just kind of some beauty in acknowledging that these aspects are in each of us, and we have the opportunity to stretch, right? To become aware, to understand how these different things show up. And that is very different from fighting, the two things fighting together. And it's even different from trying to pressure or pressurize into, I'm just going to be one way, right? That kind of flattens our options or even flattens our human experience. And so the tension for me is really this beautiful aspect of stretching into a new way of seeing, a new way of understanding, a new way of being, and being able to hold some more tension, not only for ourselves, but with those around us. And I think that this is really a key thing for leaders to do today. So where does this tension come from? Well, some people will say it comes from VUCA. VUCA is this trendy managerial acronym lately that everybody is talking about, that there's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And a lot of my colleagues say that there's more today than in the past. I have a little bit of a differing view. I mean, when I think back to our ancestors having to hunt saber-toothed tigers, I feel like that was a pretty VUCA experience. It was a bit volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so I believe that VUCA has always been part of the human experience. What I think has shifted and changed is that we have outsourced our awareness to other people, to metrics, to systems, to processes. And that the reason we have such a hard time with tension that comes from VUCA is that we don't know how to be internally aware anymore. And so that is one thing that I always try to focus on with tension, is how do I use this to help create this inner knowing, right? Instead of the leader relying on an MBA program or a management consultant, how do I give them the tools to develop their own internal awareness so that they know what to do? And I also think it's really important for us to acknowledge that leadership is embedded in tensions, all right? And this article in the Harvard Business Review, I love. I feel like it should get more attention than it does. They did a beautiful job of outlining the 7 tensions that leaders are embedded in. And you can kind of see them. We're expected to be an expert and yet a learner, constant yet an adapter, a tactician but visionary, a teller, a listener, a power holder, a power sharer, an intuitionist, an analyst, a perfectionist, an accelerator. And leadership is kind of in this shift from we spent a lot of time with the leader kind of being in control or being the hero, or what my colleague, Dr. Richard Clayton, talks about, the Superman complex, and even Dr. Simon West talks about that. And we've been trying to shed this. We've been trying to shed that the leader is really kind of more about this selfless leader, this activator, collective, less ego in it. But what is happening is that in the time period that we're in right now, it's not an either or, all right? Leaders actually have to be both right now. There are times where they have to step in and be the power holder, and there are times where they need to step in and be the power sharer. And so they're always walking this fine line, this continuum, which is why recognizing the tension and becoming more aware is so important. Okay, so I've spent some time kind of talking about some tensions. I want to talk about our reactions. And again, most of these are unconscious. This comes from the conscious leadership work. And so some of you may be familiar with Hendricks' work, or yeah, you probably are more familiar with Hendricks' work. But I think the conscious leadership did a brilliant job of helping us understand that there is this above the line response and this below the line response. And you can go out to YouTube and you can search for locating yourself, I think it is, or you can even search for above the line, below the line, and you'll find the conscious leadership video that describes this. But our brain is hardwired to go below the line. It was a survival mechanism. So, and even today, thousands of years later, our brain still has not evolved to be able to understand that we're not about to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. We're just facing a social complex problem. Our brain automatically wants to be reactive, resistant, defensive, see things as a threat, engage in drama. And whereas we have to consciously make choices to move above the line, to be curious, to be generative, to be growth, accepting, learning, and trusting. All right. And if we go back to the myth and story that I shared, it's really easy for, if we're feeding that reactive, if we're feeding that threat, if we're feeding the defensive, for us to stay in below the line behavior. And when we stay in below the line behavior, guess what it activates in others? It certainly does not activate curiosity in my experience. Maybe you've had a different experience, but it drags people below the line, even if they want to stay above the line. And so we have this dynamic that goes on. And when organizations are in tension and they're not recognizing it as tension, they get stuck in kind of this below the line behavior. And I call them bad habits. Again, it's not that people are intentionally waking up every day and saying, I'm just going to see everything as a threat and be defensive. They're actually waking up and thinking, I'm going to do my best that I can today. But the tension oftentimes drags them below the line, and your brain is hardwired to go there. It wants to go there. That's how it makes sense of things. All right. And our reactions frame how we see the problem. All right. So if I'm seeing things as a threat, all right, I'm going to frame things on how I win. All right. If I see things as emerging or generative, I'm going to introduce a frame of curiosity where I'm going to be asking some questions. I'm going to be looking to learn. I'm going to be looking to building trust with other people. All right. So it is so important for us to kind of understand the tensions that we're under, understand that we're having normal reactions to that tension, but then we also have choices. All right. We have choices to move above the line. So some tips for navigating tension. Again, I do all sorts of learning and I explore tension with leadership teams in many different ways. It really kind of depends on the industry and kind of what tension they're living in. So, I mean, I had one executive team where we explored a current tension they were living in. And we just spent 2 hours learning about how to navigate tension in a tension that they were in. Another group I just spent with the top 100 leaders, where we explored tension from some dynamics within the organization. So they were facing they were embedded in a tension of, here's our history that got us to this point, and yet we need to go to the future. And so we explored tension in a number of different ways of how do our values keep us above the line? How do we lean more into those values? And we went through some ways that were specific to their organization and industry on how to navigate that tension. But so today I'm just going to talk very generally. I'm going to give you 3 tips to navigate tension. One is to recognize the tension and choose to stay. All right. Now, in a lot of wisdom traditions, there's this concept called sitting in the fire. All right. And getting comfortable with staying in the tension, being comfortable with the heat being turned up and not looking just to resolve it. And if I think about just in the United States context, our leaders are so quick to turn that tension into pressure or stress, all right, or conflict even, instead of sitting in the fire and allowing that heat to kind of emerge and to let something new happen. All right. So we don't want to just squash down the tension or put the fire out. We want to recognize that fire is there and we want to choose to stay. And we're going to build the capacity to sit in the fire. All right. The second thing is we want to stay curious. So we have to recognize when we've gone below the line and we have to consciously come up above the line, and we have to stay curious. We have to ask questions. Part of the human experience is telling stories. So we have to be curious about the types of stories we're telling about this tension. Are we telling stories of hope, or are we telling stories of fear? Who am I setting up as the villain? And then expanding that story of saying, how is that villain a hero in their story? All right. Because all of us are a hero in our own story. So we have to really kind of sit in the tension. And then when we acknowledge that we're going to stay in the tension, we have to start to suspend or expand stories, stay curious, and ask questions. Now, there is a resource that I have here for you. There's another brilliant HBR article that I use with a lot of my clients called Relearning the Art of Asking Questions. And it helps leaders begin to understand that we get stuck in one little part of asking questions. It's a 2x2 matrix. I normally don't recommend 2x2 matrix because the world is much more complex and nuanced than that. But it is a good starting point for leaders to develop awareness of the types of questions that they ask. Why do they ask those questions? Why don't they ask other questions? So it can be a great resource in learning to stay curious. And then the other one is developing your awareness of context. So when I'm working with leaders on their complexity of thinking, one of the things we work on is contextual thinking. All right. And oftentimes we get so caught into the current situation, which is on the far right-hand side of your screen, where what's the current state? Who are the players? What's my knowledge gap? And we forget that there are all of these kind of hidden things at the bottom of the iceberg, like the larger context. What have been some historical drivers? When have we been successful and when have we failed? What is the broader context, both internally and externally, or distant and close? What's that hierarchical context? How is our organizational hierarchy playing into this particular context of this tension? And then paying attention to constraints and avoidances. What are our values, our objectives, our conventions, our rules, and how do those go into kind of how we're seeing the situation? All right. And so by leaning into this contextual thinking, developing awareness of context, one can help us sit in the tension for longer because now we have a framework where we can kind of stay curious as well. All right. But it is also a way to navigate it so that we can really map out what is happening in this particular situation. So three quick tips. So we've talked about, leadership. We are embedded in tension. We have reactions to it. We are human. We're normal. They're going to happen. And then 3 very quick tips: stay in the tension, stay curious, and develop awareness of context can really help you be much better at navigating tension. So really quickly, some upcoming events. On December 2nd, I'm really excited about this. I'm going to be hosting a live peer learning session called Rebalancing Society and How to Start Now. So I'm going to be providing evidence-based frames to create some peer-to-peer discussions on how do we get back into balance and what is our role in that and how do we activate it? So if you're interested in that, I will, I know it's on my LinkedIn profile, so I'll post the LinkedIn in my chat in a little bit. I'm going to be doing another Becky Live this year. I'm going to be talking about learning. I'm going to be talking about the different types of learning and why they're critical elements to the future of work. So I'm really excited about that one. That one will be posted on the YouTube channel as well. But of course, if you join me live, you get to engage in conversation and questions. And then another one I'm really excited about is on December 14th, I'm also offering another free learning session called Developing Your People. December is usually the time of year where we're doing those performance reviews, and we're starting to think about the next year. And I have found the 70-20-10 framework really, really powerful. And so if you have leaders, again, it's free. Invite all your friends and family and leaders. The more, the merrier. And again, we have some peer learning together around that. And then in 2022, I'm going to get into a much more consistent calendar. So the third Thursday at 10 a.m. will always be Becky Live. I'm working out kind of the topics. Right now I have too many topics. So I've got to whittle it down to the 12. I'll be asking in an upcoming newsletter what people want and what they're interested in. So again, I'll post it in the chat, how to connect with my newsletter so that you can be part of helping me figure out what topics I'm going to talk about in 2022. And then also in 2022, I'm going to commit to offering 2 free learning sessions every month. I just think it is so important for us to begin activating things in the world that I'm going to offer them at no cost. So they'll be on the 3rd Tuesday and the 3rd Thursday. On Tuesday, they'll be at 11 a.m. and on Thursdays, they'll be at noon. So I hope that you will be able to continue to join us for that. And I just want to thank you for your time. For those of you that are watching this after the fact, this is how you can get in touch with me. You can go to verticalleadershipconsulting.com to take a look at, we have a very unique approach to learning. We focus on helping the brain develop to thrive in complexity. So and we also work with leaders on developing their complexity of thinking, do a lot of thinking work. So we'd love to partner with you if you're interested. You can also reach me at Becky at verticalleadershipconsulting.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn at Becky Andree. And also we have a YouTube channel under Becky Andree as well. So at that point, I want to thank you for being here today. I'm going to stop recording and we'll move into the questions part.